American University in Bulgaria.
I want to welcome you to another event organized by Political Science Club. Today we are welcoming Mr. Michael Davidson, head of the political section of the British Embassy in Sofia. Mr. Davidson will talk today about public diplomacy and share some of his rich experience with you. So please give a round of applause to Mr. Davidson.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for having me. I'm Michael Davidson. I'm head of the political section in the British Embassy in Sofia. So I'll try and tell you what that means later as we discuss international relations and how they really work. So how it differs from what you guys study, how that then translates through to actual action and day-to-day tasks. Part of that will be public diplomacy, and part of it will be what I call advice to ministers, but also thinking about the concerns of ministers and people involved in the practical application of diplomacy and international relations. So I'll start off and say something about myself. I'm Michael Davidson. I've been in the Foreign Office for about 11 years now, which is quite a long time. I'm married to an Austrian who I met in Angola when I was there on my first posting. And since then I've been in Madrid, in London, and now here. So quite a kind of backstory, but I won't go into too much detail on that. When I was in London, I worked on European issues, on the European Council and the EU budget. So that involved a lot of thinking about some of the questions that we're going to be talking about now. And a lot of the questions that are actually what form international relations and actually create the conditions in which you can either be a success or a failure in the international arena. So what I'll try and contend is that it's not world events that shape international relations, as you've probably been told, but it's actually individuals and ministers and their prejudices, their fears, their concerns, and the day-to-day application of some very simple ideas. So we'll go into them a little bit. In order for this session to be a success, you all need to contribute, because half of the session will be you guys coming up with a plan. If you don't come up with any ideas, there won't be a plan. So it's really up to you. Let's probably start off with something like that, so some contributions. Who knows what diplomacy is? Any ideas? Anyone want to guess? Yep, go on.
Well, almost as far as it means double-folded paper. It's the literal meaning of the word.
Okay.
And diplomacy can be just the relation, the polite setting of setting your connections, your connections with the other countries.
Okay, so connections with other countries. Does anyone think that it's more than connections with other countries? So diplomacy is connections with other countries. Go on.
Also talks and negotiations.
Talks and negotiations with other countries. Good. Any more guesses? We'll take 3 and then we'll move on. Go on. One more person. Nobody from the front row? That's usually the area where these kind of things happen. No?
Okay, it's the skill with which you try to persuade the other side to accept your terms.
Accept your terms. That's very good. And you were going to say something.
A peaceful way to get to reach your goal.
A peaceful way to reach your goal. Good. So it's peace. Yeah. Okay. Good. They're all true, but I would sum it up as saying diplomacy is the way in which you reach your national interests, so achieve your national interests in international fora. International fora means in different international places. So in the UN, in the EU, they're multilateral fora, but also in countries like here. Why am I here? Well, I'm trying to achieve UK national interests in Bulgaria. which may also coincide with some of Bulgaria's national interests. If so, that's nice, but otherwise I would be pursuing UK national interests. So diplomacy is the pursuit of your own interests in international arenas. So we'll go on and talk about some of those arenas and how they shape the type of diplomacy that you do. So let's first talk about multilateral arenas. Who can name a multilateral arena? Okay, you've already spoken, so let's have somebody who hasn't spoken. Yep.
Say UN, for example.
UN, the classic multilateral arena. It's the place where peace and world peace is promoted through harmony between nations and deciding, you know, what's the best course of action for us all and avoiding conflict. Does it work? Okay, let's just do a show of hands. Who thinks that the UN works? Put your hand up. Okay, so we've got quite a skeptical crowd, about a quarter of the crowd. Okay, so the rest, I assume, think that it doesn't work. Who's in the middle? Who's on the fence? Ambiguous. Okay, so actually the majority of people. So the majority of people are on the fence. I think to answer the question, you need to go back to the essence of what is diplomacy. So national interests. If you have an arena in which there are competing national interests, often you will have discord, disharmony, and no agreements being made. This is actually the downfall of the UN. I think it's a successful model. I don't think it actually works because you see in the UN people following the national interest. Syria is the prime example of this at the UN. You need China and Russia to alter their national positions, which is in their own interest. So they retain that position in their own interest because what happens when inspectors start going into foreign countries when there's a crackdown by an authoritarian leader? That's not very good for China. They don't want to encourage the world doing that. Same with Russia. They don't want people to just think, well, there's an authoritarian leader that I don't trust or I don't believe in, so let's go into their country and check out what they're doing. So their national interest is to preserve the status quo and not to enter Syria. So that in there, you didn't have a UN resolution. You didn't have the UN saying, well, there's war, there's conflict, there's use of chemical weapons, which are a real and clear breach of international law. So therefore, you know, we should do something. No, in the opposite. You had actually the opposite, which was that the UN could do nothing. So the UN, I think, highlights the national interest argument. Who can think of another multilateral organization? NATO, good. Any others?
EU.
EU, good.
GA.
Yep.
WTO.
WTO. So you can start to rank the international institutions in terms of their ability to achieve your national interest. So let's take, for example, the EU. Now, the UK is a member of the EU. We believe that the EU should be a body through which free marketism and open markets and promotion of trade and liberalization of markets should be achieved, primarily as the first thing that it should do. And we believe that because we think that UK businesses can go into all of these new markets and make money for the UK. That's the basic reason behind having a free market liberal approach when it comes to the EU. Of course, other countries think differently. So the French and the Germans, I think, are quite wedded to the idea ideologically of a single currency because they believe it ties Europe together and forever we will not have war. And in their national interest, that's an argument that makes sense because it's part of their national narratives. Let me talk about the EU and how it works a little bit. And I will contend that in the EU, what's more important than policy is people. So I used to prepare the European Council for the Prime Minister. I used to write his documents that he would take with him in a huge pack like this, and I would expect him to remember everything that was written there so that he could argue with the leaders of the European continent and come out victorious. Obviously that doesn't happen. So I think through looking at that example, you could say, well, it's important in a leader to be able to remember a lot of facts. Because when they go into the European Council, or when they go into these, usually you have a dinner with leaders where things actually get decided. They don't go there with officials, they don't go there with a team of people experts that can tell them. They're not always on their smartphone to look up, oh my God, is that correct? Or, has he just said something that's wrong? They have to remember, they have to know the policy, and they have to know why they know the policy, because otherwise you can't argue it properly. So if you have a Prime Minister who's not very good at remembering stuff, you're likely to lose in the arguments in the European Union. When you enter that room and it goes out of your head, you're probably not going to be able to function very well. What other personal quality do you think is important to become a success in a European Council room where you have 26 other leaders? What's an important personal quality?
Eloquent.
Pardon?
Being eloquent. So that,
Being open.
yeah, no, eloquent.
Eloquent. Being eloquent. Yeah, I think that's right. Being able to argue what you want in the way that you want.
Express your thoughts and to tell to people what you want in the defined terms of what you convey to them.
Yeah, I think that's right. For me, that sits with the policy stuff, so that they know the policy, because, as far as I'm aware, even the smartest leader won't be able to make the common agricultural policy eloquent. The smartest leader won't be able to make the financial transaction tax eloquent when it gets down to actual debates, because it's usually a debate about, well, in paragraph 12b, you say and, we want but, and then you have a debate. That's how it works in Europe. So I think eloquence is important for personal charisma, but not necessarily important for winning the argument. Anybody else have any guess? Go on.
Well, you have to achieve compromises and to create some of your minor laws for your bigger.
So somebody who can negotiate.
Yeah. And to write your priorities.
Yes, I think that's very important. I think there's probably two things in there, actually. So you've got somebody who's able to prioritize, somebody who's able to just discard things which aren't important and focus on the things that are really important. That's one quality. The other is somebody who is able to negotiate effectively. And to do that, you need to be able to build coalitions, and you need to be able to make friends. So usually the most popular kid in the class is the most successful. And that is true of EU meetings. The number one person that can exemplify this is Angela Merkel. Although she doesn't have the personal qualities that you would expect to make her the most popular person in the room, she's able to form compromises, and she's very open personally to people. So you see that David Cameron, for example, is a good friend with Angela Merkel. So when it comes to European councils, they will meet up, they'll have a chat, they'll usually talk about what's going to happen, and she'll usually say, how about we do this in this council? And then, okay, but we want this. Okay, we'll have a little chat about that. And that's the way that business is done. So I think somebody who's able to make friendships and partnerships, somebody who's able to eloquently express what they want, somebody who's able to discard what's not important and do what is important, and somebody who can remember why they're doing that, are the qualities that you should look for in a leader. If you don't have those, then you won't be able to get what you want. I think that's clear. So that's multilateral forums and how individuals can alter your chances of success at multilateral forums. I think there's a difference between different types of multilateral forums. Some have real power. So you sign something in the EU, you have to do it in the member states, otherwise you're in breach of EU law. Usually gets signed into your domestic legislation. The UN enforces international law, so you break an international convention, you should expect that the UN will be able to make a decision and uphold that law. But other international fora, like, for example, I had to do a survey once of all of the international fora. So one was the International Confederation of Rubber Plant Growers. Well, that's unlikely to have any power. You have borderline ones like the OECD or the OSCE, which have some powers, but usually more than not they're advisory. They recommend things. Countries can take it or leave it. So I think when you think about which forum you're going to go to, you need to think about your national interest, which one has real teeth, and then go from there. Let's think about bilateral relations. So what helps the UK to get along with Bulgaria? Who's got any guesses?
Common interests.
Common interests, very good. That's a very, how can I say it? It's something that diplomats and politicians say a lot, common interests. What does it mean?
That they should fight together for something.
So fighting together for something.
It's going to be good for their countries.
So things that are useful for both, things that are in the national interest of both countries. That's exactly right. Anything else that would affect relations?
Also, mutual benefits, something that the UK can provide to Bulgaria, something that Bulgaria can provide to the UK that's useful for each other.
Mutual benefits. So things that you can provide to us in exchange for things that we can provide for you. Yep, that's right. In Bulgaria, there are fewer benefits to the UK than there are to Bulgaria from the UK. Do you think that's an accurate description? I mean, maybe. Therefore, sometimes it's skewed. There's more benefit for us in our relationships to the US than there is for the US in their relationship to us, to the UK. That's a fact. So it's not only about the mutual benefits. If it was balanced, yes. Sometimes it's not. That's why common interests become so important, because you have to focus on what things do we both want rather than what are the benefits of our cooperation. Anything else?
Trade.
Trade. Trade for the UK is the number one. We want to make money, we want to make it fast, and we want it to benefit our people. So that's the number one thing. Yeah, trade, well done, good. Anyone else? How about the ambassador in country? Do you think he makes a difference? Well, let's do a show of hands. Who thinks the ambassador in a country makes a difference to the outcome of the relationship between those two countries? Okay, so the majority of people, okay, the ambassador will be, my ambassador will be very happy about that. I think you're actually right. I mean, I work for an embassy, so I'll probably say that. So sometimes the personalities of the ambassadors can make a huge difference. I think if you look at the ambassador now, he's a very energetic guy. He wants to get things done. He's very action-oriented, and he'll probably look more towards short-term gains. So that will affect our relationship with Bulgaria. We're sent here to Bulgaria to make deals and to do things here. So if you've got an ambassador that actually doesn't want to make deals, well, that would have a huge effect, because you wouldn't be able to go out and do that stuff for the UK. So everyone who put their hands up, congratulations, well done. And thank you for justifying my existence. What else will affect bilateral relations? How about your ministers? Do you think that they have an impact on the bilateral relations? Okay, let me give you an example and then I'll ask the question again. Niki Mladenov, as the Minister for Foreign Affairs, very interested in the Middle East. He had his roots in his childhood there. He was particularly focused on the Middle East. He hosted the Syrian opposition in Bulgaria. So he was somebody that we came to when we wanted to do things in Syria, when we wanted to think about maybe other ways or creative ways apart from just getting everybody in a room to get through to the Syrian opposition. Vigenin, zero interest in Syria. Absolutely no interest in Syria. Okay, it's an international issue, so he will be briefed about it. But his main focus is the Western Balkans and the Eastern Partnership, so those countries which border Russia. That's his focus. So we deal with him now on European neighbourhood, the prospects of Ukraine joining the EU and issues like this, but not on Syria, apart from refugees, which, you know, they're here. So, okay, now based on that little story, who thinks that ministers affect bilateral relations? Great. Okay, so that's bilateral relations. I'm going to tell you quickly a little bit about how ministries work, or in particular my ministry. So we take all of that stuff, we think about what international arenas exist, who's there, what's the competence of our minister, can he go in there and actually make an argument, or is he just going to sit by himself in the corner of the room? An example of this is Gordon Brown, who's our previous Prime Minister. He had no friends in Europe. He would go to the European Council, he would sit by himself, he would often arrive late, he had no interest in speaking to the other leaders, and therefore they had no interest in speaking to him. Complete opposite, Tony Blair. Tony Blair was everybody's friend. You know, he would have talked to them 2 or 3 times before they even got into the room. So he was really able to achieve some things and really lead Europe just through his personal connections and charm. So you take into account the people that you've got going to the international institutions. You take into account how they run, what they do. Have they got teeth? Can they actually enforce things, or are they just going to give recommendations? Then you think about the actual relationships between the countries that are involved in each of those meetings. Bulgaria is part of the EU. Whenever Bulgaria goes to a European Council, somebody phones me and they say, what's Bulgaria going to do? And then I tell them, they're probably going to do this, they're going to vote for this. I'll go and meet some people. So every multilateral meeting has a bilateral element, so bear that in mind. And a lot of it all rests on the personalities involved, so also bear that in mind. So given everything that I've told you, we're now going to do an interactive session in which you're going to advise me on a specific issue. I'm going to be the minister, and you're going to tell me what to do. Who has a topic of choice that they would like to discuss? So anything from international relations. Syria. So let's start with something small then, huh? Yeah. Okay. Okay, what in specific?
UN resolution in Syria. Should there be one?
Should there be a UN resolution in Syria? Okay. Right. Now I'm going to tell you who I am as the minister. Okay, I've made some notes. I'm anti-EU. I don't like the EU. I've got good relations with the US, but nobody else. Just the US. And my political party in the UK think that I'm weak, so I'm a little bit susceptible to possibly, if I make the wrong decision, the job will be gone. So that's the caveat. I'm an EU-hating, American-loving, weak foreign minister. And you are going to tell me how to get a UN resolution on Syria. Okay, so we'll start here. And what we'll do is we'll go through the process that I go through. So we do things called submissions, and they're advice that we send to ministers. And they're all the same. and they all contain different advice, but they're all the same format. So we'll start with objective. And it's get a UN resolution.
We should probably specify condemning the Syrian government, for example.
So we need to specify, you think?
Yes.
Everybody agree that we need to specify what the UN resolution should do, okay? Condemning.
Maybe at the beginning we have to say that there is a problem in Syria. Begin with. Let's say that.
We'll come down to the wording of the UN resolution once we've decided a way that we can try and get it. So let's focus on just that. We want a UN resolution condemning Syria or the use of chemical weapons. Okay, hands up who says use of chemical weapons. Oh yes, everybody. Okay, so we've got an objective. Now we have to try and figure out how to achieve that objective. So let's try and think of what we call stakeholders. Who makes this decision?
Security Council.
Security Council, you think? Anybody else got any other guesses other than Security Council? So,
Well, it depends on the character of the resolution.
mm-hmm.
If it's an advisory, it can be General Assembly that advises.
This is rule number one when you're dealing with multilateral institutions that you've very cleverly brought out. You have to know your institution. So if you wanted to get a UN resolution, you need to know which body gives out the resolution, which working group feeds into that body that gives out the resolution, and you need to know what that resolution would possibly do. So all of this information is exactly right. So if we say that it's actually the working group on chemical warfare, or on I'm trying to think of now what it's actually called. We'll just call it something fictional. I can't remember. So it's anti-chemical warfare is the working group, the working body. One of my colleagues attends that. It happens every month. Does that affect who our stakeholders are?
Yeah.
So who are our first stakeholders? Who are the people that have actual influence on making this happen or not happen?
Well, with council members?
So you've got, what did you say, the council members?
Yeah.
So you've got, you think the UN Security Council, which is permanent representatives or heads of state. Okay, so you think that we have a chat with all the people in the UN Security Council, they all agree, that's job done. Who thinks that the only people we need to speak to are the UN Security Council?
The people from the commission you mentioned on...
So this commission, yeah, so these are all UN bodies. Chemical, let's call it the Chemo Weapons Working Group. Okay, we can talk to them, fine. So we speak to the people in the Chemical Weapons Working Group. They all agree that it's a good idea because, let's face it, they're pretty against chemical weapons, being on the Chemical Weapons Working Group. We take it to heads of state, we phone them all up. They say, yeah, it's a pretty bad idea. Even the Russians probably think it's a bad idea. Is that enough? We've job done, we've got a UN resolution. Next time it's tabled.
Well, maybe you have to first talk with your friends in the US because you might have some opposition from China or Russia.
Speak to my friends in the US.
Yes, because they have special relations with the US, so they're your natural allies. If you want to achieve some goal, you have to talk with them. they have some other relations that they can employ for you. They can, not for them, they can organize, they can use their influence, so you have some back support when you
I think you're right. Let's talk to our friends in the US. I think it's pretty clear that the US has some influence in the world. So we'll put them down. Who else?
We can go to like human rights watch organization, something like that, because it's chemical weapons, so it's obviously going to be something they will say is bad, and they have a really good reputation worldwide, so the countries will listen to them.
Okay, so I go to an NGO or and they all say it's bad because, you know, we all know NGOs, they're very soft and they don't understand chemical warfare. So let's go to NGOs. Syria. Good. So, you know, we're talking about Syria, so we might want to speak to them. We're condemning them, but we might want to tell them in advance, see what they want to do.
Your own government, because you have to convince your own people that this is the right choice.
My own government, so my colleagues at the cabinet. Right. So we've got quite a lot of stakeholders. I'd say one thing that you're missing is the UK wanted this UN resolution. In the end, we went to our parliament and they voted that we couldn't have do a strike without a UN resolution. So then we were a bit stuck because the UN wasn't going to come up with a resolution. So what you've missed here is that your stakeholders are domestic. So it's not only your cabinet, it's also your parties, political parties, your parliament, your officials in your own place. You need to really express why it's important that this happens, but also the people of your country. If public consensus is we don't care or don't do it, then you really need to bring them around. And that's where the NGOs can help, because you get them to say the things that you want to say to the public over and over again. Right, so we've got a series of stakeholders here. And from coming up with those stakeholders, what we can do is we can say, okay, we've got some options. Let's see. So, what about the people bordering Syria? Do you think they're important? The Middle East? It's quite a volatile place. Should we put them in? Yeah. Maybe the Arab League, maybe? They could be.
And Israel.
Israel.
Turkey, yeah.
What about in the UN Security Council? Russia?
Russia and China, they will oppose you, so maybe you have to try to trade their agreement for this resolution. Or to convince them in some way.
Okay, good. So now, I want you to put all of this into two options, because that's all we give to ministers. We give them two options, two recommendations. Do this, or do this. And then they decide. So, the objective is get a UN resolution. What are the options? We've got the stakeholders. It's quite complex. We're going to somehow do a deal with Russia using the US as a make-weight to convince them to vote with us, and the Arab League are going to support us against Syria, and Syria are going to change their minds, and our cabinet are all going to agree with us. What's option number one? Anyone hazard a guess?
Scrap the plan.
Scrap the plan. Yeah, okay. Does that get you the UN resolution?
Nobody don't want it anymore.
Ah, okay. Anybody got any answers? I'm Mr. Europhobic. pro-American, weak with my own party minister, and I've got all of this stuff to achieve, which is pretty difficult. Where do you start? What should you offer me?
Okay, the first thing is convince your cabinet and your party. So because you're weak, this is your only chance.
Good.
So that is the starting point. So work with NGOs and the.
Yeah.
So we've got one option, which is speak to your cabinet, get them on side.
Well, first of all, you need to get, as you said, evidence that your idea is worth looking at and worth of considering. So you really need the evidence from NGOs and that this thing is bad and you need a UN resolution for that.
So you've got, we need to collect more evidence. So we need to collect more evidence, speak to your cabinet. Anybody else got any?
To get your support first.
Pardon?
To get the support from the United States first, because then your work will be more powerful.
Speak to the United States. Okay, that's good.
Convince Russia and China.
I would say that if it was me, my option one would be speak to the United States. I only speak to the United States anyway, so there's not many other options. If I speak to the United States and they back me up, they'll most likely have the evidence because they're the United States. They've got a lot of capacity. And if I go to the United States and come back with an endorsement from the United States, I can take care of my cabinet issues. I can say to them, look at me, I've been to the United States and they support me. So I would say option one is speak to the US. So let's explore then what happens next after that. Let's say we put up option one, the minister says, well done, you're fantastic, promotion, you're now in charge of delivering this. I'm going to speak to the United States. What does that look like? How do I, as the minister, speak to the United States of America, which is a country, I think you all know that. How do I speak to the United States? Okay, who's got the first suggestion?
You speak to either, well, probably you're going to start from the embassy of the US in your country and speak with the ambassador. Or if you have a good relationship with the foreign minister, you're going to speak with the foreign minister.
US ambassador in London, the foreign minister, secretary of state.
Your ambassador.
My ambassador in Washington.
Yes. It's a bit closer to the White House.
Yeah, that's true. He could just shout out the window. What were the other options? Obama?
If you're friends with him.
So I would go and either directly speak to Obama myself, give him a bell, or I would I'd go and have a word with David Cameron, my boss, and say, you should speak to Obama about Syria. Okay, so Obama. Any other options? Okay, how about in America, nobody cares about this issue. So the public are against. The politicians are concerned, but, are they going to stick their neck out in Congress? Probably not. How about going on a talk show? Why don't I go to America, go on a talk show, and tell them how much of a problem it is? Why don't I write an op-ed or an editorial for the New York Times? Why don't I do something that's public to try and persuade the people that I'm about to try and call that it's a good idea? That's public diplomacy. That's why you see sometimes the ambassador will give a speech or go on a talk show. We talk about things in advance of doing them because we think it makes people more likely to do what we want. So always try and remember public diplomacy. Maybe the ambassador in Washington could host an event for all of the people that think the UN's a fantastic institution. So in America, probably about 10 of them, and they can bring them all over, talk to them about speaking to all of the people that they know, and trying to encourage the circles around Obama to really get interested before I give him a call. So that's what we call influencing. And you have to build networks with people that know people. The reason why most people sign up to Facebook, I guess, is because somebody told them that they were on Facebook, who you vaguely like, and you'd like to maybe be in contact with them. Okay, so you sign up. That's how it works. Recommendations from people that you trust are much better than just me calling you up and saying, hey, I'm the UK. Remember, we've got those mutual benefits. Remember, we've got those common interests. Why don't we do this? So influence, public diplomacy, and then there's a range of other actions that you can take. All of these depend on the person that's doing it. If you've got Gordon Brown, you probably wouldn't tell him to call Obama because he might screw it up. So you try and probably have a think about going into my ambassador, going in to see somebody in the White House who has some influence. So maybe the chief of staff or somebody a bit lower down. So now we've spoken to America. They're on board. They now believe that the UN is a fantastic body with which to promote peace in the world. And they've support us in the UN Security Council. They're going to push for it. Then you have to go back to the original question of the objective of how to secure a UN resolution. So you would then revisit that. You'd go back to the minister with step 2, which would have a couple of options. Now that you've spoken to America and you've got their support, why don't you go and speak to the European Union and try and get them on board? Because when the European Union supports something, that's 27 countries and they've got a rich history. And when you then go into the EU, all of those actions of influencing public diplomacy will be multiplied by 27. So the ambassador in Estonia will go on a talk show and talk about Syria. We'll do some news articles, and all of the embassies will kick into gear to try and influence the policy that we're trying to achieve in London through that one objective, but times 27.
There are 28.
There's 28
Yes.
in the EU. Ah, yeah, sorry. Right. I'm from the UK. We don't follow these things closely. Yeah, so times 28. But actually, it'll probably be more than times 28 because we'll, at the same time, instead of saying, let's just do it in the EU, we'd probably say, let's do it in international fora. So we'd then go into the Arab League. So every ambassador in the Arab countries who are part of the Arab League, they would start speaking to their counterparts, start speaking to the presidents, prime ministers. And you see that from one simple idea and one option comes such a variety of action on a single issue. And that's how public diplomacy, that's how international relations work. You get one idea, one goal that's in the national interest, and then you think of some options, and then you start to execute them. And it happens across the world, in a variety of institutions. And what happens, in my opinion, is actually that because everybody's doing that, you at some point get to a kind of stasis, and you're kind of trapped. So you say, okay, we've got not just one objective, but actually 10 that we want to achieve. You've got 10. And then you start to do trade-offs. And you start to say to them, okay, you want to achieve this, everything's kind of a bit deadlocked, so let's do, we'll do that for you. And then you start to get into deals and negotiations, and that's a whole different ball game. But this is just how policy translates through to action. And that's my job. That's what I do. So I'm here to make sure that the UK's top objectives in Bulgaria, which are to tackle organised crime, because that results in people, drugs being trafficked into the UK, is stopped. My second objective is to increase the chances of UK business succeeding in Bulgaria. So we do that in a number of ways, including through judicial reform, which actually affects both of those things. And the third is to help Brits when they get drunk in Sunny Beach and fall off balconies. And that's why we're here. All of this other stuff then comes on top of that. So I think that's the end of my talk. Does anybody have any questions on all of that stuff? That was quite a lot of information. Does anybody have anything to ask? Okay, thank you very much.
This program is brought to you by AUBGTalks. For more, please visit us at aubg.edu/talks.